I will retire most proud that we had this moment where we were galvanized as academics together with a mission to change the way in which we interacted with students and to not be deterred by the many institutional forces that resist change.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. Okay, so some full disclosure here. I have some ulterior motives with this episode. Listeners know that one of the broad themes of this podcast is the future of higher education and how our institution must change to meet the demands of our time. Today's conversation is an inspiring case study of institutional change. I speak with the University of Montana Western Regents Professor of Geology, Rob Thomas. Rob tells the story of how he and some visionary colleagues transformed UM Western. In a time of crisis, UM Western had the courage to innovate and become the first public university in the United States to adopt the block scheduling system. Rob explains the wisdom of the block and why it was an especially good fit for Western. We also discuss the bumpy, nonlinear process of making that sort of change happen. It was not easy. This conversation was an inspiration, and I'm excited for you to learn about how UM Western saw opportunity in a crisis and did something about it right now. So we're here today with Professor Rob Thomas. Actually, I should say Regents Professor Rob Thomas. Rob, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me over.
All the way in from Dillon. How was the drive this morning?
Perfect. Nice dry roads, no problems.
So you're a professor of geology at University of Montana Western.
I am.
And what have you been there? How long now? 93 is? I can't do the math that quickly.
26 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, a lot has happened in that 26 years. But I'd like to get into a little bio first. So you grew up in California.
Yes.
Went to college at Humboldt State.
I did.
And
went to a community college, actually.
Yeah, so that was a question I had. Was it looked like you started out with an associate's degree?
Yeah, I'm from a first-generation college-bound family, relatively low income. My dad worked at the plastic factory, and my mother was the lunch lady at the middle school. Mm-hmm. And I went to what we lovingly referred to as UCLA, the University of California by the Livermore Airport.
Nice.
And it was the local community college, cows in the back 40. It was actually not unlike Dillon. And it was a great place to start.
Was that kind of like in high school, was college on your radar? Like, how were you sort of thinking about what was next after high school?
Yeah, I think my folks always pushed education, even though they had not had that chance. But
right.
I think that it wasn't clear to me how far I might go with education, and I'd been working in construction, and
sure, yeah,
had a fellow that I was working for that I think probably would have loved to have me come on and kind of take over the business and that kind of thing. But I caught the bug for learning pretty quickly.
Yeah.
A couple of natural sciences classes at the community college, passionate instructor, right, that motivated people. And I caught that bug and decided I'm going to continue on. And that's why I went on up to Humboldt State once I could afford it. Sold a 65 Mustang to pay my tuition so I could go to school.
Do you ever regret that now?
Nah,
okay.
Well,
yeah. I mean, it opened up a lot of doors.
It did.
Yeah. We sold a car once for my wife to go to graduate school. Sometimes I think I'd like to have that car back, but at other times I think, that master's degree has served her well. So,
absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, so you've had a few different experiences. Went to Humboldt, and then here was getting your master's here at the University of Montana. Kind of your first Montana touch point.
Yeah, I had no connections with Montana whatsoever. I'd gone to a national meeting of the Geological Society in Reno, and I ran across the the infamous Don Winston,
Okay.
who was this wonderful fellow that was a geology professor, now retired here at the U. And Don was, he's just a larger-than-life character. Plays the banjo and says "goddamn" a lot. Just a real character. And I knew instantly when I met him at the meeting. I remember sitting down for a 15-minute conversation, and about probably 3 hours later, it was typical Don.
Yep.
It was like, okay, that's it. I'm going to go to Missoula. And it was, I had low GRE scores, so I had a tough time getting in, but I squeaked in and really caught the Montana bug and always wanted to come back.
Sure. Did you go directly from your master's into a PhD program?
No, I really didn't. I think that, those of us that work in the profession, I think most people, being honest, would say that they never see that they could potentially actually get a doctorate and become a college-level instructor. I just didn't see that on my radar screen as possible. So I took a year off, and I had been working in the industry doing geotechnical consulting in the San Francisco Bay. And so I went and did fault and landslide hazard work in the San Francisco area. And during that time, I really missed being in the thick of learning new things. And so I spent a lot of time applying to various grad programs, and my top choice was the University of Washington. And I got in there, and my advisor, Jody Bourgeois, was the sole female on the faculty of about 55.
Right. This was in the late 80s, mid 80s, right?
Late 80s. Sole female of a group of 50 plus males. And I learned a lot, not just from Jody as an incredible geologist, but as a female in a profession that was very male dominated, in an environment that was very male dominated. It was a great learning experience.
And so why Vassar? That seems like a departure.
Well, you take the job you can get, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that concept. Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's where the job was.
That's where the job was. I was finishing up, and there was two jobs in my subdiscipline in the nation. One was south of the Mason-Dixon line, and the other was Vassar. And I probably shouldn't have been selected for that Vassar job. There were actual several female candidates who were way more qualified than I was. But although I'll not mention any names, the fellow that hired me, I think, was it was a good old boy thing, and I got the job, and we had connections. He had interactions here at the U, and we had some faculty connections, and he was a native of Washington State and knew people at the university there, and so it was. That's what happened, and I really liked what Vassar stood for in terms of being a kind of a beacon of women's education, one of the Seven Sisters, and one of the early places that a woman could get an education on par with men at Yale and Princeton and Harvard, which were all private, or were all male only.
Right.
And so I thought very highly of Vassar. Poughkeepsie, New York was not where I had envisioned.
Not a hotbed of geology.
There was good geology there. It just wasn't. It's one of those things that, when you're in a tenure line job, that you've got that first kind of 6 or 7 years to decide where you want to be. And I knew that if I got tenured there, I'd probably never go.
Right.
And so when the opportunity came, I remember I was looking, and I saw a job at what was then Western Montana College of the University of Montana.
That's quite a name.
Wow. And they were hiring somebody to teach geography, geology, and physical science. And
that's quite a portfolio, too.
It is. It was literally still
it's like 4 or 5 jobs.
It was the normal school still. It was the teacher's college. And not that there weren't teachers' colleges elsewhere.
Yeah,
but,
when you say the normal school, what does that
well,
mean?
normal schools, of course, were the regional teachers' colleges
Okay,
to train
okay.
teachers. And in the state of Montana, there were 4 original universities: the Land Grant Institution in Bozeman, the University in Missoula, the School of Mines in Butte, and the Normal School in Dillon.
Okay.
And so it was founded in 1893, and it was literally the last normal school in America when I got there in 93. It was its 100th year anniversary. Sheila Stearns came as the chancellor that year. And we were literally, to my knowledge, the last remaining normal school in the United States. We literally had 3 degrees. We had elementary ed, secondary ed, and a extended early childhood education program. That was it. We had no degrees in geology, no degrees in English, no degrees in business.
So you were being brought in to teach people that would go into teaching kids science at a elementary and high school level.
Yeah, I was hired by the dean of education there.
Yeah.
I was in the education department. We were all.
So why'd you say yes to that?
Department.
Why'd you say yes to that job?
I don't. I had Lyme's disease when I was in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
Probably got bit by a tick there. Dutchess County was right next to Lyme County, Connecticut. So
ground zero.
It was ground zero, and I don't know. I think I had an epiphany that life is short, and if I viewed Western as an opportunity. It was like, this is the last normal school in America, and it needs to be reinvented because it wasn't going to make it. I had advisors, including Don Winston, who were like, I'm not going to write you a letter for that goddamn job.
Why on earth would you go there?
That's it,
right? And so you're at this stage, early in your career, you're already thinking like, this is a place that could be transformed, and I could be a part of that.
I saw that at Vassar I was going to be a cog in their 150-year-old wheel. And at Western, I could be back in the West. I could be in the mountains. I could be skiing. And I could also have a career at a place where maybe something interesting could be done. And so in the interview process, one of the things also I noticed was, there was a level of tension and, I don't know, lack of kind of sincerity as human beings, if you will, at Vassar. And when I arrived in the Butte airport, which is where I flew in for the job interview, my colleague Steve Mock picked me up. He is a chemist, and Steve was more normal than anyone I was working.
Yeah, no lack of sincerity in Butte and that's in central Montana.
Yeah, and I just thought, this is really what I want to do. I want to be in an environment where, Vassar was a bit like Camp Vassar. It was very segregated from the Poughkeepsie community.
Right.
And everybody, it was very much like a like a prep school, a residential prep school environment. And you kind of had to dedicate your life to the place lock, stock, and barrel in that way. Little did I know I would dedicate myself to Western lock, stock, and barrel, but it was different. It was my choice, and I was in an environment where, in particular in Dillon, you really have no choice but to interact with people in the community. And by nature of the community, it's extremely mixed. You have a university and you have agencies like the Forest Service and the BLM, Great Harvest Bread, Patagonia, and so on.
Big outlet.
And then they're mixed in with the ranch community and all the sports systems that go with that. And the fly fishing community
all
as
the
well.
Tourism, guiding, all of it.
And so it's very mixed in many ways. I mean, it's dominantly a kind of typical rural conservative ranch town, but it's mixed enough that it's I found it very interesting.
Yeah.
It was one of those places that you couldn't silo yourself with people that thought like you did. You had no choice but to have your arguments well honed, because if you were going to make them and you were going to make them publicly, you're likely to get challenged down at the coffee shop.
Sure, people would engage. Yeah.
Right, people would engage. And I people used to always ask me suspiciously, how do you like living in Dillon? It was never, how do you like living in Dillon?
Right.
It was always suspicious. And my answer to that was, it's the most real place I'd ever lived.
Yeah. That makes good
Because there's
sense.
the full spectrum of society, and you have to engage with it.
So arriving and early on having a vision that this place needs some sort of change, you were at the center of bringing this idea to town that eventually became the Experience One program. I want to talk about this on a variety of dimensions, but first, let's talk about what Experience One is in its current iteration. And how is it different than the way a university or college typically packages education?
Yeah. In a nutshell, I always like to say it's freedom from scheduling.
That's at this moment in my life, that sounds so sort of liberating.
Well, scheduling drives us to teach in certain ways.
Right.
And so if you can have freedom from scheduling, you can really be more innovative with teaching. And of course, it's a misnomer, because there is never freedom from scheduling. You have to, I have to acknowledge that students have jobs, and students are student athletes, and that there are time frames I cannot work within, and I have to adjust. But what I mean by that is, I had always, I like to tell this story. I had a faculty member at Humboldt State, and he used to always say that we should burn these buildings down and buy vans. And of course, what he meant by it was that the best learning experience for us, in particular in the geosciences, were to get out
Get
and
outside.
get on the rocks.
Get in it.
That's right, and experience, engage in authentic practice in the discipline.
Sure.
Right. So if you're in the School of Education, you work with kids and teach kids. If you're in the business department, maybe you work with local businesses.
You already start a business, right? In class.
That's right, or start a business.
like Babson has a program where freshmen start a business.
Absolutely.
And most of those businesses are viable.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And one of the barriers to that is the 50-minute, 3-day-a-week class.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
Which is, of course, designed for lecture. And it goes way back to the training of priests.
Right.
And
people don't realize that lectures from a time before the printing press, right?
That's
when
right.
Only one person had the book, so they had to read it to everybody.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm the master of this information, right? And I'm going to tell you what's important about this.
Yeah.
It sounds very familiar, right, to our modern lecture environment. And to me, evolutionarily, we learned through experience, right? Somebody was like, well, Joe ate that blueberry yesterday and died, so don't eat the blueberries.
Right.
And that person still got to pick the blueberry and eat
not
it.
the
And then
sort of-
another person dies, and a few people die until finally somebody decides don't eat the blueberries. And we learn experientially, there's a great George Carlin quote out there about how, if you tell people to not touch the paint, they have to, because it's wet. If you tell people that the paint is wet, they have to touch it. Right. And my goal has always been to get people to touch the paint.
Yeah.
To make them have that desire to want to touch the paint, to want to engage with the discipline. And so to go back to how it works in nuts and bolts terms, students take a single class for 18 instructional days. So it's
consecutive weekends, the whole thing?
Nope. So it's three.
Okay.
It's 3.5 weeks.
Sure. Okay.
5 days a week, and so it goes for just a little shy of a month. They finish on a Wednesday. They get what we call a block break, where Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday
Yeah.
is off for them. We faculty are, of course, grading and scrambling to get ready for the next block. And then they show up on Monday and they start a new block.
Okay.
So I'm teaching and the students are taking one class at a time. And the scheduling of the day is left up to the faculty member. We have kind of evolved, maybe I'll call it devolved, into a system by which in the gen eds we decided that we needed to have a morning and an afternoon division of courses. And
Okay.
so students go for 3 hours in some classes in the morning, say 8:15 to 11:15, and then some students do an afternoon block, if you will, and they'll go from 12:15 to 3:15. But they're only in one class, and I'm only teaching one class. But that is really pretty much, at least in my department, and I'm in environmental sciences. In my department, we pretty much only adhere to that for the general education classes, the 100 level classes. And even there, we play around with it and take students out for 4 or 5 hours on Thursdays and Fridays to do extended field studies and so on.
And this structure permeates the entire university.
Yes.
I mean, we'll get into this because the bigger, a big part of this conversation is going to be how on earth did you make this
Right.
happen? We'll plant a flag there, come back to it. But it seems in order for a structure like this to work, everybody has to be bought in
Yes.
and doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just structurally again, so everybody on campus is on the block system.
Yeah.
We do offer courses that run through the whole semester. They're called stringers. This all, of course, like all good ideas, stole it lock, stock, and barrel from Colorado College.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of private colleges around the country that have been doing this. Evergreen, Prescott College.
Yep.
And the folks I know that have gone to those colleges have had tremendous experiences, swear by the system. Yet Western is the first public university to do this, right?
That's correct. Yes, we're the first public university to ever try to do this and to pull it off. It was in such an unlikely environment. I mean, no money, a highly conservative environment. And I don't mean that in a political sense. I just mean that
risk averse, right?
Right. No change, right?
Yeah.
Change, rural ranch community change is slow. Big changes are not beneficial to the success of business in that environment, and so they're skeptical of that. They're skeptical of outsiders with new ideas, and all of which is understandable. It's not a criticism, and so that was a difficult environment to pull it off. But I think to go into maybe driving mechanisms. The normal school wasn't a tenable model in 1993. I mean, teacher certification was available pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, a lot of substitutes.
Yes. And so, the normal school model actually went away in the 1930s when the state of Montana added normal schools up on the High Line, MSU Northern, what is today MSU Northern, and one in Billings, what's today MSU Billings, which started out as normal schools. And so the niche of being the teacher's college has been gone for Western for a very, very long time.
Right.
So that was not a market niche. If you want to look at the university from a business perspective, that was not a tenable market niche. There were just too many other options.
So
and we were down to a very small number.
Yeah, and so the university knows it has a problem, an enrollment problem, a funding problem. How aware is it of a need to change to deal with that problem? I'm just trying to understand the culture of the community at that moment.
I think that people knew. There was a Save Our Campus committee in the Dillon community.
Okay.
So I heard from many people in the course of being the great Satan of this thing and being the kind of visible activist for it. that, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it was like, no, it's
broke.
broke.
Yeah.
And you guys have a Save Our Campus committee.
Yeah.
There's a problem. And so I think that people knew. I'm certain my colleagues knew. I know that. I think that a lot of people thought if we just keep our heads down and aren't very visible, we'll be fine. But there was a fundamental change that occurred in 1993. We went to head count based funding in 1993 in the university system.
Yep.
Prior to that, there had been a set amount of money that every campus was going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they went to a head count based funding model, then it was counting, seats.
Yep.
And if your numbers are low, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And so overnight, we were put in a position, in my view anyway, where we had better figure out a way to become relevant and to grow the numbers to where it's sustainable.
Right.
And I felt like, the things that we weren't going to be able to change. You can't change the culture of the environment that the institution is in. It's in the community that it's in, and that's the way that is.
Yep.
You can make things look nice. You can, add the beer and circus, and you can build some buildings, and you can make a nice football stadium, and you can do these other, things. But I was not convinced that those were things that resulted in sustainable growth and stability.
Around the edges.
Yes,
sort of.
Yeah.
Fancy amenities aren't going to do it.
It's beer and circus, right?
Plus, they're expensive. I mean, you can maybe
expensive.
find money to pay for them for the short run, but ultimately, if it doesn't lead to growth in revenue and students,
yes,
people aren't going to keep funding that stuff.
Absolutely. So to me, we had to be relevant academically.
Yeah. Okay.
And I looked at it and I thought to myself, well, our greatest negative is our small size, and our greatest positive is our small size.
Yep.
Because we had small size.
Well, let's situate that. So about 1,500 students. Like what's
now?
What was the size then?
I think on campus, if we had 600 students on campus, we were doing pretty good.
So it got really small.
It was small.
And how large was the faculty?
50.
Okay. So small group.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. There are Class A high schools that are larger.
Right. Right. But that actually maybe contributes to understanding here's a moment where we can change. Our numbers are small.
I was at Vassar. I mean, people were paying, $75,000 a year to get small class sizes.
Right.
And so, a lot of it is, artificial, right? We decide what is good and what is not as good in higher ed based on things that aren't very tangible and real.
Sure.
In a lot of ways, right? Somebody decides in a ranking that, Harvard's the best or whatever. And it's like, is that really real?
And
educationally,
then all the things
right?
that administrators do to game the rankings. And I shouldn't say game, but they decide like in the business school world, like rankings are driven a lot by placements. So, the more elite schools only admit people that they know they can place in certain companies that are important to those rankings. And it's there's a lot of gaming of that.
There is, and it's I can't deny that it's real and it's important. But we were in no position to do anything about that at Western.
Sure.
So as far as I was concerned, it was really boiled down to the one thing that we could really do was we could change the way in which we educated. In fact, actually, there were a couple of moments, those epiphanies of what the right thing to do was going to be. One was we found that as we started developing the liberal arts degree programs separate from ed, which is we did first, that was the first thing we did, that good ideas got duplicated real quickly by other campuses.
Okay.
So that, in the
other campuses in the Montana University system.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And kind of the way it worked in those days was Tech was the resource engineering school. Western was the education school, and Missoula and Bozeman could do whatever they wanted.
A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hi, this is Joe Anderson. I am the CEO of Reflex Protect, and you're listening to A New Angle.
And we really weren't given a lot of freedom to do what we wanted. So, the idea of having a separate English degree, for example, at Western, that wasn't possible. To have a bachelor's degree in English.
Stay in your teaching lane.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What we did is we had a degree on the books that nobody ever used called the Bachelor's of Liberal Studies. And we used the secondary education coursework, and we created a Bachelor's of Liberal Studies in Literature and Writing, Business and Communications, Environmental Sciences, Fine Arts, and Interdisciplinary Social Sciences.
I'm familiar with the spirit of these workarounds.
That's what we did.
Yeah.
And but good ideas were being co-opted by others, and it hit me, we've got to change the way in which it's not about what we offer, it's about how we offer it. We have got to change how it is that we offer the education. And because we were small, the thing we could do was to engage students in authentic practice in the discipline. In other words, I can remember going to George Dennison and saying, what would you say if I told you that we were going to go on to the one class at a time model like they use at Colorado College, and we will become the experiential learning college of the University of Montana system? And he looked at me and he said, my son goes to Colorado College.
Interesting. Okay.
And I said, I didn't know that. And he said, yeah. And then he paused, and in classic George fashion, he leaned in real close to me and violated my personal space. And he took his index finger and he poked me in the chest, and he said, you'll never pull it off at Western. And he poked me 3 times in the chest.
That was not saying it was a bad idea, though. That was just saying you won't get it done.
Yeah.
Right.
And to his credit, I don't want to be bad-mouthing George, George became our great champion and advocate, actually, but we had to prove it to him.
Sure.
And it took years of having to prove it. But that was the driving mechanism behind it, was we just couldn't be the normal school anymore. We were small. That was an advantage. And it's like, okay, let's take advantage of this. Why should we lecture to small classes? We should take advantage of that small class size and get out and actually do stuff with these students. And that was really kind of the birth of the idea of the block. And, geoscientists, it was a no-brainer to me because we do field camp.
Yeah, it seems very in line with the ethic of your discipline.
Yeah, we had this month-long experience during the summer, which is this immersion experience in the field, and everyone in the geosciences knows this is the seminal experience as an undergraduate, and we all. So we're just hardwired for this notion that if you can engage people in authentic practice in the discipline, it changes the game. It changes their interest level in the material. If you can make the projects real, you can make it so that their commitment to it really changes. Because they know that somebody else is going to look at it. I've always told people that we faculty are like surrogate parents, and students will turn in junk to us. But if they know that somebody outside of the institution is going to see it, does that change everything?
And so how do you get, I can see this being a slam dunk, like you said, in the geosciences or these disciplines where field immersion is part of the ethic. But how do you get somebody who teaches English or math?
It's funny. That's English always comes up as the one. The English folks are doing really interesting and creative things with it. I think that the goal was to provide that freedom from scheduling so that the faculty member could figure out, how do I engage these students in this discipline?
Sure.
And I mean, I probably shouldn't have said it, but I can remember at times, saying to people, if you can't engage them in some kind of authentic practice in the discipline, then you don't have a discipline.
Yeah, well put. Yeah. Because so I can see, from basically, it's a means to a powerful end, right? Like if you remove these constraints of schedule and you assume that hey, give me a set of students that are solely focused on what they're going to be doing with you, like that's a powerful premise.
Yeah, I think my bottom line is, I mean, I have a hard time answering specifics about what my colleagues do with their time in some of these other areas because we trusted and respected our colleagues to do the right thing with the time.
So how did this
Which was
movement?
key.
Like, how did you get? I could see how you're starting around the halls, talking to some colleagues, and this. How does the idea kind of start to gain some momentum?
Well, I think it's really started with George Dennison coming down to the campus to kind of ask us what are we going to do. I think George was concerned about our future. Sheila had just come on as the new chancellor, and it was a time of opportunity for change. And so we started moving forward, and we got these liberal arts degree programs going through this backdoor, BLS degree.
Sure.
And then we started actually, co-opting time by, I can remember courses that had been scheduled in a Monday, Wednesday, Friday format with a separated lab. We instead went to a Tuesday, Thursday format where the lecture and lab were integrated into a 2-3 hour blocks.
So a longer form block of time.
Yes.
So it's a little bit of a hybrid deal there.
Yeah. So we kind of played with it for a while.
Yep.
And then, others saw, well, that looks good, and they were like, well, I'm going to try that.
Sure.
And,
okay.
So I think there was some by example kinds of things that went on. And we took the provost and a colleague of mine, Sheila Roberts, and I went down to Colorado College, and we did a fact-finding mission, and we wrote a report on the feasibility of Western moving to the block. This was all, supported by Sheila Stearns, and we got some money through the research group in the system to go down there. And so we wrote this extensive report. We were convinced by our experience down there that this was not something that was just for rich kids, that this would work for Western student population.
It could be built in an accessible model.
That's right. And so that money wasn't the issue with this. It was the will of the faculty to engage differently with the students. And I don't know, we just had a really great faculty who were engaged and willing to try something different. I can remember we conducted we conducted a poll at one point, and the question was asked, will you be willing to consider going to the block system? And we had about 84% of the faculty willing to do that.
Okay.
And I haven't seen that many people vote in favor of their raise.
Yeah. Is the faculty part of the? Is it unionized?
Yeah, we're unionized, and we have a faculty senate.
Okay.
We didn't have a senate at the time, and we had false starts. We got very close to it. We had a very bad day. We still refer to as Black Tuesday, when the community kind of came down on us. The Dillon community came down on us, and just really put the gauntlet down.
Before we started recording, we were talking about the community dynamics,
yes.
and so in a town like Dillon, where the borders between the university and the community are not so defined, like how is that? Culturally, these changes in a conservative environment. How is that? What's that playing out like?
It's small community with a university that they'd had for 100 years, and honestly, I completely understand that they believe that their commitment to that institution was greater than mine. You're a newcomer. I'm a newcomer, and as a faculty member, I'm likely to go away, and that was what they had, 26 years later, I'm
Yeah.
still there. But
Whether they like it or not.
whether they like it or not, and I think they do. I hope they do. But I understand completely the thinking, and I think they viewed themselves as it was their job to protect the institution. Mm-hmm. It's admirable.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
admirable that people in the community are that invested, actually. I mean, I didn't like it because it was a barrier to change, but I completely admire it.
That's tough, though. Like, there's this notion of I need to protect the institution, but sometimes that can get in the way of seeing that there's a need for a change.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah. It's being convinced that the business model is working.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, it's not working. And the numbers bear that out.
Mm-hmm.
And, this was not, I think, in all honesty, we probably had we been thriving in terms of numbers and economically
Sure.
and so on, this maybe wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. It's certainly harder to create that impetus
Yes.
for transformative change.
Absolutely. I do believe that many of my faculty colleagues actually really, there was Deweyism in higher ed, the constructivism and so on. And amongst our education, my education colleagues was deeply rooted in the Western philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a propensity towards this notion of experiential learning,
Okay.
of authentic practice.
Yeah.
So there was strong philosophical support, really, for it. And the number of faculty that were opposed were pretty minimal. And so that was to our benefit in that there was a philosophical interest
There was
in
buy-in.
it. And I think that, I one of the things I always like to mention is I've had a colleague come to me since, we're now well past it. We adopted this in 2005 campus-wide. So we've been on it for, close to
Almost 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah.
And I had a colleague come up to me here recently who was, we were all in this together. It was a feeling of being galvanized together in a way that I'm convinced I will never experience again in higher education. And she came up to me and she said, I miss those days so much. She said it was such a time of possibility and excitement, that we were doing something new that nobody had ever done before, and it was creative. And I think that that's at the heart, ultimately, of what was good about what we did. For a long time, I spent my time shilling for my institution, right? That, we're on the block and we're the only ones doing it. And here's the results. And
Yeah.
here are the numbers and so on. But at a deeper level, I will retire most proud that we had this moment where we were galvanized as academics together with a mission to change the way in which we interacted with students, and to not be deterred by the many institutional forces that resist change, and we pulled it off. We refused to be defeated, and ultimately, what happened is that really pulled it off for us is my spouse, Annalise Ripley, is the Dean of Outreach and Research.
Okay.
And she had said, I have to go to a TRIO meeting in Washington, D.C., and you should go along, you and Sheila Roberts, my colleague that helped, my partner in crime on this, many partners in crime, one of the many partners in crime. And she said, you and Sheila ought to go and talk to the people at the Department of Ed about a FIPSE grant, Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education.
Okay.
So we went there, and I can remember going to the FIPSE office and talking to the guy that was the head of the program, telling him what we wanted to do, and he started laughing. And I said, what? And he said, this is the greatest idea I've ever heard. He said, you'll never pull this off.
Yeah, it's George Dennison all over again, right?
And I said, why? And he said, well, the faculty will never do it. And I said, I have the faculty.
Yeah.
I said, we had that 84%, faculty pull. So I said, I got the faculty. And he said, he said, well, the reviewers will never, support this. And he said, but I'll tell you what. He said, there's no rule.
Reviewers for the grant.
For the grant.
Yeah.
So he said, there's no rule that states that if a grant is externally reviewed poorly, that we can't review it as a team here at the Department of Ed.
Interesting. Yeah.
He said that we
So
can do that.
he's telling you green light internally.
So
yeah.
he told me, he said, I promise you that I will see that we look at it, no matter what happens to it during external review.
Yep.
So that's what we walked away from. And long story short, there were a couple of misfires, and some colleagues of mine and my spouse wrote that grant, and it got funded, and it paid for a pilot. So we brought in 75 undergraduate students who were just given this opportunity. They had already applied to Western, so we didn't go cherry pick them for this. They looked like our normal student population. Same number of working students, same number of student
representative
athletes.
Sample.
Totally. And they just had this choice to do their gen eds one at a time in groups of 25. So we had these 3 groups of 25. And so 75 students came in, and we taught the gen eds one at a time.
Sure.
And the grant paid for people to come in and replace those of us who were teaching the
backfill.
pilot.
So you could immerse yourself professionally in this pilot.
That's correct.
Right.
So
Okay.
There was a planning year, and my colleague Steve Mock was the head of he ran the grant. He was the grant administrator. And so he did all the planning along with a staff member, Margot Heberling, and they did a great job of setting it all up, and they got these students in. And, if anything, we did, the faculty who taught in it were highly interested in teaching in it. So, you kind of had people who were, approaching it very positively. So if there was any bias at all, that was it. And it was wildly successful. Our retention of those students from year 1 to year 2, and they had to go back off the block in year 2.
Okay.
Right? Because they were only there to do their gen eds one at a time. That's what the grant paid for. 96% of them came back for year 2.
That's amazing. I mean, we're situated, just for some
96%.
context, I mean, we struggle to get 70% here at the University of Montana.
Typical, right?
Year 1 to year 2. So that's a tremendous number.
It was incredible. There was no beer and circus. It was completely just an academic change. And it had this profound impact. And our enrollments, the campus enrollment skyrocketed, graduation rates skyrocketed.
Sure. Probably placements.
Placements skyrocketed. The full-time students, you want to have people taking maximum FTE, right?
Yep.
That number skyrocketed because every class was 4 credits.
Yeah,
so the
had to be full enrollment.
Yeah, so every student practically was taking 16 credits per semester. The system just results in having this high FTE generation.
Right. So the one thing that we haven't touched on is, you've mentioned some of the people, but what was the interface between faculty and administration at this stage?
I think that they were cautious. They have to be. Whether it was, starting with Sheila, who, really was in the hardest part of it all, probably, because it was the early phases of it and the peak of the resistance to it. And Sheila did not stop us. It takes a lot of guts to be an administrator that does not stop an idea that is wildly unpopular in a community that's small.
Yeah.
So I've always given her a ton of credit for, not only facilitating, but really more importantly, not stopping us.
Yeah. That's a really interesting place for a leader to be in, right? She's not necessarily in a position where she's the champion for the idea.
No.
But she is doing what it takes to allow it to sustain it, to keep moving forward, right?
And it's a rare thing, I think, when you've got, that kind of, depth of buy-in amongst faculty for basically changing fundamentally how they interact with students. Everything you know about teaching and learning, out the door, start over. That's a remarkable thing to get faculty to buy into doing that in a large percentage in an institution, right? And then to have a CEO who is willing to let it run and see what happens. When Sheila left and the new fellow came in, Steve Hulbert, I can remember Steve coming to my office and saying, "This block thing, it's not happening."
Interesting. Wow.
He was like, "I'm not touching this." Well, he spent a year, going to Board of Regents meetings and realizing where Western was in the grand scheme of things, and he was back in my office within a year.
Yeah.
And
how do we make this happen?
And he was like, "Tell me more about this block scheduling system." So we went from there, and he was the one that got us over the hump. And I can remember the day it was approved at the Board of Regents meeting, and it was I can remember George Dennison coming across the room, and I'm like, he's going to hug me, and sure enough, he was proud.
Yeah.
We stuck it out and pulled it off.
Rightfully. Why in this whole process? I mean, you've stayed in your lane, not in your lane, but you've stayed in the role of a faculty member. Was there ever a moment where you thought, I need to become an administrator to drive this sort of change? Like, what was that? Was there any conversation about that?
No. No. I think, all faculty feel sometimes that they're driving the bus from the back seat.
Yeah.
Or
perhaps they're not on the bus, but that's a different type of
faculty. Chasing the bus.
Yeah.
Or not chasing it. I'm certain that I said it more than once, that I felt like we were in the back seat of the bus trying to drive. But that's not fair to the administrative team involved in all of this, because they did facilitate a lot of this. Our provost, Carl Ulrich, deserves a lot of credit that he never got for facilitating a lot of this change. My spouse, Annalise Ripley, was a central player in it. And our CEOs over the years were central to it as well. We're pretty thinly administrated at Western, so there weren't that many people to work with, and them not just as the person who's the administrator, but actually as a human being and a member of your community.
Right.
So the interactions are a little different, and I never presumed to see myself in some kind of administrative role, and nor was I really interested in that. I was really more interested. I think I'm good at selling used cars, and so I was kind of the person who, when a lot of people did the hard work of it, I was, the person who, was good at convincing people.
Sure.
I think the provost in that video you were talking about had said, the former provost, Carl Ulrich, had said multiple times that, convincing people, and he mentioned me.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether for good or for bad, I think my talent is in sweet talking people into ideas. And but it couldn't have been a bad idea. I couldn't have talked people into doing something that was stupid and wasn't going to work. And so people saw that it was going to work, and that it was going to take a lot of work. And it took a ton of work. And it took a ton of work on everybody's behalf, from the physical plant, people, on
everybody
across.
It touches every part of the institution.
Every part of the institution. So
but that also at the same time makes it powerful.
Yes.
Right? Because like you said before, it was this galvanizing force. It was,
Yeah.
You all planted a flag and everybody knew in what direction you were
and
running.
as it went on and people saw it work, people's memories about the process by which we got there changed in a positive way.
Sure.
So one of the examples I like to give is I teach a class where at the end they do a mapping final, and then I take them down to a local place for pizza, and they finish off their final and turn it in. And the proprietor of that restaurant was somebody who was not real keen on the block and would always talk to me about it, right?
Yep.
And tell me why, he didn't think it was a good idea. And so, I don't know, this was about 5 years we were into it, and I was in my normal routine of having my class down at his joint for the lunch after they'd done their final. And we're leaning up against the bar, and he said, I'm sure glad that we did this.
He was putting himself as part of the team.
And
That's
thought,
really telling.
We won the war.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when people think it's good enough that they want to take that kind of ownership in it, even when they were opposed before, then it worked. I think more importantly, that's what it tells me, is that it worked, because they're hearing that, he employs students. So he's hearing from those students that they like it and that it works. And you kind of universally hear that, from students. You're pretty hard pressed to find students who say negative things.
Yeah, I mean, I have not heard, my sample size is small, right? But like a graduate of your institution or Evergreen or Prescott say anything negative about the block system.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a variety of reasons. The ability to focus on one thing at a time is huge. It's less stressful.
I think it's more and more important in our world now, too. I mean, the reality is people are entering a workplace where they have to multitask, but we all have to figure out ways to preserve time for deep work.
Yes. And they are multitasking. It's just, I always tell people, in the real world, you don't multitask between the chemistry final and the English paper you have to write.
Yeah.
And so what's happening now, if I've got students out on the Clark Fork River working, on a project, with the Clark Fork Coalition, well, they're multitasking. So as we're out there, I might have a team that their specialty is doing the surveying, but maybe I've got to have somebody jump in to help and do some task, and they don't have that experience.
Sure.
And it's like, well, you're going to learn real quick. And that is, I think, very real world, to where people have to adjust quickly to the environment they're in, be willing to step up to the plate and give it a try, not fear failure, right? To be willing to fail, and to be okay that they failed, and to let them know it's okay. Just keep doing it. You'll get it. These guys will help you.
Well, and you have a structure that enables some of that too. You have time.
Yes. That's the key.
The bell doesn't ring and they go home.
Freedom
or whatever.
from scheduling. That's the key.
Yeah.
It really is. I just think it's rooted in our DNA. This is how humans learn. They most efficiently. I'm not saying that the lecture is irrelevant or doesn't have a purpose. It does. But I think that the most efficient way to learn is through experience. One of the experiences that I had in this whole process, there was a local rancher who was a senator state senator from Dillon, who was skeptical about going to the block before we got to it. And I had been asked by the chancellor at the time to give a talk about it at some public forum. And so I did. And after it was over, he came up to me and he said, I think that this sounds pretty good to me. And he said, but I'm hearing from my constituents that this is a bad idea. So what's going on here? And I looked at him and I said, Bill, you didn't give your kids 15 weeks of fence mending lectures before you put some pins in their pocket and a hammer in their hand and you put them out onto the ranch and fix the fence.
Yep.
And I said, while you're out there doing that skill development, you're talking to them about why it is that the cows are being rotated from here to here and why you're doing this and why you're doing that. And that's the merger of the theory and the practice. the merger of the theory and the skill. And that is what we want to do with our students. And he immediately got it.
Sure.
It was like, oh, well, that's totally logical.
Had you rehearsed that?
No,
because that's a great pitch. That's a great analogy.
No, it was
just sort of came to you.
That's what I'm good at.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Making stuff up.
So, well, no wonder you were at the center of this initiative. Rob, it's been awesome learning all about it, and
thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of an ulterior motive here, not necessarily pushing the block system on the University of Montana, but trying to help folks understand that change is possible in an institution. We're built in some ways to not change, and there are reasons for that, but we're in a moment where I think we need to really take a close look at how we deliver education.
Yeah, I think that, we faculty have got to find a way to be happy in our jobs again. Mm-hmm. I think, that's a bold statement. I know there's plenty of people happy in their jobs, but
we should just stipulate, we've got really good jobs. And
yes, we do.
Generally, they're better than a lot of the other jobs out there. But I get your point is taken.
Yeah, it's a function of finding a way. Initiatives like this are a way to resurrect passion and enthusiasm for being in higher ed. And I love the way I teach right now. I love the fact that I have the ability to work as kind of intimately as I do with students as mentees, right? And in a very direct way. I play the guitar, and I can't imagine, how do you learn to play the guitar, without playing the guitar and mentoring with somebody, right? And so in many ways, to me, that's what I enjoy about this system, working with my students. And I just think that if there are ways to hybridize this and use it, senior year experiences. I've always had a vision of honors college that was, targeted at high potential at-risk kids. And you put them through their gen eds, one class at a time. They're going to be successful. You're going to see retention rates go through the roof. And that's a game changer, I think, for that student population. Mm-hmm. I was that student population.
Yeah.
And I think there's ways to hybridize this and make this work for for every institution. You don't have to have the whole institution go onto the block. There are ways to use the freedom from scheduling in parts of the educational experience and enhance everybody's experience.
Well, and that authentic, I love that phrase you brought to the conversation, authentic practice in the discipline. That's a powerful takeaway.
Yeah, it's kind of at the root of it, I think, to us. We've made that our statement as a campus, that's what we do. When we were trying to figure out, how do we label all this, we said we're going to say this is authentic practice in the discipline. Mm-hmm. And therefore it encompasses every aspect of that. There's been criticism that this is vocational, right? We
didn't talk about that, but I can see that as being an obvious.
It's not vocational, right? And not that vocational is negative. Nobody should consider vocational negative. But what this is it's hybridization of theory and practice. Mm-hmm. It is you're engaging in both at the same time.
With enough time to let it percolate.
Yes. Yeah. And to empower students in a way that is authentic. If I empower them to just memorize and regurgitate information to fill in the Scantron form, I haven't done much.
Yeah, that doesn't have much shelf life. Well, Rob, we could go on all day. I want to be respectful of your time. Thanks so much for coming over here. And personally, I hope this is the beginning of conversation. So fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Okay, really enjoyed that conversation with Rob, and I hope that you learned something from it. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps: executive producer Stefan Borsum and interns Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.